Welcome to Perspective and Potential, where we uncover new ways to see the world and tap into the incredible potential within each of us. I'm Abigail Straight, joined by my co host and mother, Gwen Fund. Together, we'll explore ideas, stories, and strategies designed to help you grow, shift your perspective, and embrace a more complete version of yourself. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can check us out at perspectiveandpotential.com. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in and see where a new perspective might take you. Today, we're exploring a topic that shapes how we grow, communicate, connect, and that's learning styles. Whether you're a parent, an educator, a leader, or simply just someone trying to understand yourself or others better, recognizing how people learn can open up new pathways for patience, progress, and stronger relationships. So, we're diving into the different ways we process information, why it matters, and how we can use that knowledge to bring out the best in ourselves and those around us. Learning, one of my favorite topics, but it seems to be a concept that we tend to associate with the time we spend in school in some sort of formal education. So why do so many of us stop thinking about how we learn once we leave school?
Okay, you are exactly right. Ideally, we learn throughout our lives because learning is really just the acquisition of knowledge. And you're right, many of us do associate learning with going to school. But we need to understand that learning is really something that begins in utero and it continues throughout our entire life. The environment around us is constantly changing, and that requires us to be changing also. So, making those changes is the result of learning something and then applying that new information in order to keep our life in balance with the environment around us.
So let's start with this question then. Do we underestimate how much our own learning style affects our communication, productivity, and even our confidence as adults?
Well, I think we do. There's that old adage that everyone measures by their own stick. Well, I think that applies to learning as well. We tend to communicate with others in a way that makes sense to us. And the one that we're trying to communicate with may need that information delivered in a totally different way. So, whether that is in our personal relationships or with business colleagues, we are not going to have success in our goals until we can share information in a way that can be learned by all parties involved. So, like everything else we talk about, each of us is unique in how we acquire knowledge. Some of us are right brain dominant, and some of us are left brain dominant. And here it's interesting to note too that our heart, are literally our heart, and our mind are connected. Um, and if you read all the poetry and the sonnets and all those kind of things, you know, people feel with their heart and they think with their mind. Um, and in just everyday things, we can know something like all the cigarette ads they put out for years. Um, that we knew cancer was connected to smoking, but yet the people that smoked were so, attached to it, their feeling for it, it was something that comforted them, that they would risk that in order to keep that. So our heart and our mind kind of need to work together. And I don't think a lot of people really understand that concept either. If you look at people who are just very logical, sometimes they'll make decisions that are hurtful. But then again, if you look at people that are only, emotional, they too will make mistakes based on not being logical enough. So there is a balance that we need to be aware of between our heart and our mind, or rather, our what we know and the feelings involved. Now, some of us are what we call global learners. That means we see the big picture. But then there's a lot of people who are more analytic. They're more into details. They see all the little things. So we're having this big meeting and somebody's got this big idea, but then the little detail oriented person starts picking it apart with all the details that might or might not work. So some of us actually learn better in group settings, but then again, some of us learn more by working it out on our own. Some of us really do well in the formal school setting, like a classroom or a conference, but others prefer more informal setting, like field work or vocational training. Also, our natural likes and dislikes play a role in our learning, as we will lean towards subjects that interest us and have more difficulty with subjects that we don't really enjoy.
And I think, everything that you just mentioned, we're going to probably talk about several times today. We'll hit on the point that a lot of this um, is going to take some exploration and reflection on our own learning styles, but also some observation of the differences in people around us. Because what's interesting, just in the example of big picture versus detail oriented, the reality is one way of thinking or learning is not superior to another, and we do need all kinds to make the world go round. So, can understanding our learning style actually maybe reduce stress or increase motivation in adulthood, especially, in our interactions and connections with other people?
Well, yeah, of course, because if we know how we learn best, we'll be able to learn more and we'll feel more success. And that will reduce the stress associated with learning new skills. And it will help us to have more confidence in our ability to try new things and take on new challenges. And let me just add here, it will also, help us realize, like you said, if we're the global person, we need that detail person. And we might, it might not be upset with that detail person if they start pointing out things that might be a problem in the implementation of our big idea.
Absolutely. And I think, oftentimes in relationships, you talk to other couples, and usually there's always one of each in a relationship. That learning styles, communication styles always aren't always mirrored, but they complement. If we're, you know, observant and I think respectful of other people's differences. So let's dive in a little deeper and let's get into the clues that we can look for in our day to day life that will help us uncover how we naturally absorb information.
Well, there are a lot of learning style profiles out there, and most of them test for either a visual learner, an auditory learner, a tactile learner, or a kinesthetic learning person. Visual just means, things like reading, right? You can see the PowerPoint on the board, or you can read the book, or you absorb knowledge through your eyes. You watch somebody do something. An auditory learner is somebody who needs to hear it. Right? They listen to podcasts. They'll record the professor in order to be able to listen to that over and over and over again. Tactile, maybe like we're trying to teach math and we need to have the little blocks for the child to learn, here's 10 blocks now, 5 are red, 5 are blue, and they need to actually have something to work with in their hands. A kinesthetic learner is someone who needs motion in order to grasp something. And so, like, this can be great in vocational training, for instance, or in sports. How do you hold that tennis racket or the golf club in order to make the ball do what you want it to do? How do you stand? How do you hold your body? So that would be, something that would be a kind of an example of a kinesthetic learning thing. Now, it's important to note that none of us are strictly one method type of learner. Sometimes we need more than one of those modalities to help us understand all that we need to know about a particular subject.
As a classroom teacher, you might have 30 pupils in your classroom, and they're each going to have a different learning style. And so, I have sat and watched hundreds, perhaps thousands of students, and seen the different learning styles and the combinations of learning styles at play. And it really has helped me as an individual as well clue into my own learning style. On top of a learning style, there's also certain things that I think we should pay attention to in terms of our emotional triggers that help us identify um, maybe our resistance to learning certain things. So when we're feeling frustrated, when we get distracted, when we procrastinate, it actually reveals a lot about our learning preferences. So, for example, when I was in 8th grade and taking algebra, I became very frustrated because that level of math takes an intense amount of concentration just on a single thing. And I didn't know this about myself, but concentrating for a long period of time is not a given strength. I can track a lot of things at once. That is my strength. So focusing and zeroing in on one thing for an extended period of time is not a strength, right? But that was something that I learned because I became frustrated when something was requiring that of me. Distraction, right, can definitely, in the moments when we are distracted very easily, maybe we should circle back to what is it that we were doing at the time, and we became so distracted, right? If you put something in front of my teenage sons while they're playing video games, it's going to be a lot harder for them to be distracted than if they're doing an unfavorable activity. So what it does is those emotions and those behaviors actually reveal some hidden roadblocks. Once we identify what those roadblocks are, or what those things are that tend to shut us down, we can start to give ourselves supports. Sometimes it might be that we're not confident, or we have a shallow depth of knowledge in a particular subject, or we just don't have interest. At the end of the day, though, there's still tasks that have to be completed. So when we can start to uncover those things, we'll learn more about our own learning style. So, let's just talk through some specifics here. You talked about the different learning styles. Does movement, repetition, or even music support the brain's ability to retain information, and how does that?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, there is more to learning than what a learning style test is going to tell you. Some of us actually need that quiet environment, right? We need to have all those distractions out of the way. Um, Maybe there's a stressful issue that needs to be dealt with so that we're able to focus, because we try to do something or learn something, but we keep ruminating about this thing that's on the back of our mind. So Do we need muscle memory to be involved in learning this task, like playing the piano? That muscle memory, that is really hard, but that is what we need. Do we need a routine? Does it help to exercise if you have music, right? Or to prepare ourselves for the learning to take place? Uh, is this an unstimulating but necessary subject that might require us to remove all those distractions or to come up with novel ideas on how to make it more stimulating for us? So, would it help to include a friend or a tutor to work with us? Again, all of this, we're just trying to get to know ourselves from the inside out. So, we ask ourselves questions like these, and then we try different things that make sense to us.
So then moving from that discovery period for ourselves, once we recognize our learning style, I, for one, am a visual learner, and a little bit of a kinesthetic learner too. I kind of have to go through those motions sometimes to feel confident. Um, Once we recognize our learning style, how do we then use that knowledge practically in work, in relationships, or in personal growth?
Well, so after we're aware of our own learning style, I think it's an easy jump to recognize that others may learn differently than we do. So we can observe others, ask them questions that'll help us communicate and teach them in ways that will facilitate that exchange of knowledge. So a teacher who teaches only in the way that makes sense to their own self is not really a teacher. They kind of dispense information, but it can be like a radio frequency that isn't picked up by any receivers. So, in order to be a real teacher, we have to kind of meet people or the students where they are. And the same goes for a parent. A parent who doesn't take the time to explore their own children's learning style, they can bark out a lot of orders that are never completely understood by the child. So our own self esteem can be undermined as we tell ourselves that we can't do things only because we've never learned how in a way that made sense to us and our learning style.
So let's focus in on the home then. How can we create space in our homes and our lives to ask, what helps me learn best? And then actually listen to the answer.
Well, so I think, making it part of our personal and family culture to do self exploration activities and then to be sharing them with each other. Take these learning style quizzes as a family and think of ways and activities that allow each of us the opportunity to share something in a way that makes sense to all the other members of the family. Because to know ourselves well is fantastic, but to know the ones we live with and love is really the icing on the cake. Um, and it will help us connect and communicate with each other better. It'll strengthen the bonds that we have with one another. And it will create in our children that lifelong love of learning and growth that we want for them.
And I think the other thing it furthers is by showing and modeling understanding for the different learning styles within our home, it builds in some compassion and understanding for them as they go out into the world, into the workplace, into their own future homes. Just as I shared that married couples in general often have different um, learning styles. Well, through procreation, often our children inherit one or the other of those learning styles. And so now we're communicating with them as well. And sometimes, we do have a difference in communication, but understanding stopping, being patient, working through and helping the children also identify their own learning style. Again, it's only going to help the communication in the home and for the child as they go out into the world. So,
Absolutely.
how do we stop labeling ourselves as inherently bad at something and start asking, well, what would help me learn this better?
Well, I'm big on goals, right? So you set that goal to learn something that really has great interest for you, but you feel a little unable to accomplish. You break that down into small daily tasks of learning about that particular thing. Give yourself the option to repeat the daily quest as often as you need to until you feel competent in that task. And I'm just going to throw that, I've been studying French on Duolingo for 5 years. I still can't speak French, but I know more about that language now than I did 5 years ago. So I think we need to understand there's also a lot of other things that can interfere with our ability to learn, and with our children's ability to learn. Studies have proven that children of divorce tend to do not as well in school as their peers. And probably a lot of that is because of the stress, the emotional stress that has entered into their life. Maybe their parents are still at odds with each other. Maybe they're having to travel back and forth from one parent to the other. Maybe it's a lack of support. Mom and dad are both so busy working or having their own social life that they are not there to help support the child and with the homework. Any kind of trauma is going to cause a person to be a little bit slower in their learning process. Nutritional deficiencies, children who are hungry don't learn well. If they're ill, it's very hard to focus and concentrate on learning when you don't feel well. Any kind of addictions um, will, also impede our ability to learn. And of course, there are people who have mental health issues, whether, those are learning disabilities or just inability to control emotions. All of these things can be impediments to us being able to learn. And so those things need to be kind of explored and supported before learning can take place.
100%. I think moving through those life circumstances, um, some of those uh, maybe innate, like you said, some of those mental health concerns, working through all of that, um, absolutely is fundamental. Goes back to that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, before we can actually learn. I think another thing, if I when I'm communicating to people about how to be productive in their tasks and their learning, one of the things that I suggest is, in getting to know yourself, identify not only your communication style, your learning style, but also the time of day when you feel most energized, and capitalize on those moments. Um, you know, I am a morning person. I get out of bed normally, or usually I've been laying in bed and thoughts have already been going before I actually ever even get my body out of bed, and my brain is just going. I sort through problems that were weighing me down the day before. The next morning, all of a sudden, my mind is clear and I can think and I can power through and I'm ready to go, right? My husband is the opposite. He is he can stay up into the wee hours of the night and make incredible progress on a project that he's working on because he is focused, where my energy levels are so low. And so the more that we get to know ourselves, our learning styles, maybe some of the life situations that we're in, our triggers, the frustrations, our distractors, and our energy levels. We've now given ourselves all the data that we need to form a plan. And in education, that is what we do. If we have a particular student who is struggling in their learning, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to sit down and we're going to do observations. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to interrupt the learning environment. We're just going to watch it take place. And so that's what I really encourage people to do as well, is get to know yourself, track some data, right? If you have to write it down, keep a journal like we've talked about so many times. That will help us better understand who we are as learners. And I'm not suggesting that we enable all of those things or maybe our weak points, but rather than what tools can we give ourselves to set ourselves up for success. So after you've done the data, the reflection, look at the tasks then that you're trying to complete. What are the goals, like you said, that I want to do? And then it's a matter of just matching, when are my energy levels the highest, right? If I want to learn a new skill and my brain is most active in the morning, then I need to be intentional about setting some time aside so that I can learn that in the morning. If I am tired, let's talk about communication. If I get a little bit cranky and I'm irritable when I'm tired, if that is or hungry, right? And somebody is trying to come and ask you questions that it's taking your focus, then we need to be able to give ourselves some tools that say, you know what? I need about 10 or 15 minutes and go and take care of, a nap or a refreshment before we come back to try to resolve or answer those questions. How can we recognize that understanding our learning style isn't a limitation, but it's really just a tool for unlocking our full potential?
Okay, so we do all have a preferred method of learning, but we are not limited to that. And so I would hate to see somebody pigeonhole themselves and say, I'm a visual learner, I have to have it written down. Because we really can use all the methods to secure information. So sometimes, as a visual learner, after we read the directions to a project, for instance, we find that we learn even more as we are constructing that project. Our understanding becomes, more 3D, right? It's more clear. So we always want to start with our preferred method, but don't be afraid to use them all, because knowledge is the power to grow and to achieve. And learning is how we acquire knowledge.
Absolutely. And I love what you said. Knowledge is power, right? So give ourselves all the tools, the information, get to know ourselves, and that will give us that power to achieve our full potential.
And getting to know others gives us the power to communicate with them in a way that will be clearly understood.
As we come to a close, let's pinpoint the most crucial points from our talk and consider how they apply to our daily lives. We talked about the many different ways that we learn. We can take a moment to discover the type of learner that we are, the things in our life that might need to be addressed before we can begin learning, and certain triggers that may cause disruption to our learning. We also discussed the importance of getting to know, getting to understand, and appreciate and respect the learning and communication styles of those around us. After all, that is how further compassion and understanding and progress are achieved. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. Your input helps shape the conversation and makes perspective and potential even more impactful. We're Gwen and Abby, and you've been listening to Perspective and Potential. Until next time, keep exploring new perspectives, and remember that every small change can lead to something big. Food for thought.
Bon appetit.